December 14, 1931, Woodley Aerodrome, near Reading. The Avro biplane's wingtip kissed the frozen ground during a low roll, and in that fraction of a second, metal screamed against earth. The aircraft cartwheeled across the airfield, shedding pieces of itself like a dying bird molting mid-flight. Wood splintered. Fabric torque. The engine ripped free from its mountings and tumbled ahead of the disintegrating fuselage. Inside, 21-year-old Douglas Bader felt his legs crumple beneath the instrument panel, bones shattering like kindling, blood pooling inside his flight suit. The ambulance crew found him conscious, which seemed impossible given the wreckage. They applied tourniquets with shaking hands, knowing they were witnessing the end of a promising flying career. Before we continue, if you're finding this story as gripping as we do, hit that like button and subscribe to stay with us through more untold stories of courage and defiance. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and share this video with anyone who needs a reminder that limitations exist only in the mind. The surgeons at Royal Berkshire Hospital worked through the night, their instruments moving with desperate efficiency. The right leg was gone above the knee, simply gone, the damage too catastrophic for any hope of reconstruction. The left leg had been crushed from ankle to shin, compound fractures splintering through muscle and tendon. Both legs would have to go. Bader went under anesthetic, not knowing if he'd wake at all. When he finally surfaced 3 days later, a nurse with professionally composed features told him what remained. He had stumps where his legs used to be, and the Royal Air Force had already begun drafting his medical discharge papers. The career he'd spent years building had evaporated in the time it took an aircraft to complete one final, fatal rotation. And in that moment, lying in that hospital bed, watching December rain streak down the windows, everyone believed they'd seen the last time Douglas Bader would ever touch the sky. Douglas Robert Stewart Bader had arrived at RAF Cranwell in 1928 with the sort of swagger that made instructors simultaneously impressed and irritated. Born in February 1910 in London, he'd grown up believing rules were flexible suggestions, and consequences were things that happened to other people. At St. Edward's School in Oxford, he'd excelled at rugby and cricket, playing both sports with more aggression than finesse. His instructors at Cranwell found a cadet who could perform brilliant aerobatics when focused and reckless stunts when bored. He graduated in 1930 with solid marks and a reputation for low-altitude flying that gave his commanding officers ulcers. The crash should have ended everything. The medical board's decision was swift and unambiguous, permanently unfit for flying duties. No pilot had ever returned to operational flying after losing both legs. The physical demands seemed insurmountable. High-G maneuvers would create forces prosthetics couldn't handle. Emergency bailouts would be impossible. Bader accepted his discharge with outward grace and inward fury. Taking a desk job at Asiatic Petroleum Company, where he pushed papers and slowly suffocated, for 7 years he existed in gray limbo, married a woman named Thelma Edwards who loved him despite his moods, and tried convincing himself that civilian life could be enough. It wasn't. He remained a pilot without an airplane, a warrior without a war. The prosthetic legs from DeSoto Brothers arrived in January 1932, and they looked like medieval torture devices dressed up as medical equipment. Aluminum limbs weighing 8 pounds each, with leather cuffs that strapped around his stumps and mechanical knee joints that clicked like door hinges. His brain had to relearn walking from first principles, overriding to decades of unconscious movement. The pain during those first attempts defied description. His stumps, still tender from surgery, bore his entire body weight through the prosthetic sockets. Skin broke down. Blisters formed and burst. He fell repeatedly, hauling himself upright with language that made nurses pretend sudden deafness, and tried again. By March 1932, he could navigate stairs. By April, he was driving a modified car and terrorizing the roads around Roehampton. He played golf badly but determinedly, developing a swing that compensated for his inability to shift weight naturally. He even attempted ice skating, which ended with him sprawled on the ice. Laughing at the absurdity while horrified onlookers rushed to help, the message he was sending to himself, as much as anyone watching, was unmistakable. His body might have changed, but his fundamental bloody-mindedness remained intact. The RAF Medical Board examined him in June 1932 and confirmed what everyone except Bader already knew: he was permanently unfit for flying. They weren't wrong by any reasonable standard. They were just dealing with someone who'd decided reasonable standards didn't apply to him. Then September 1939 arrived, And suddenly Germany was invading Poland, and the RAF's definition of fit for duty began shifting under the pressure of desperate necessity. War cabinet expansion in late 1939 meant the RAF needed pilots more desperately than it needed peacetime medical standards. Bader wrote letters, polite at first, then increasingly insistent, reminding the Air Ministry that he could fly perfectly well and that artificial legs were considerably easier to replace than experienced pilots. The third batch, written in early 1940, as pilot training programs struggled to meet demand, finally landed on a desk belonging to someone willing to gamble. Air Vice Marshal Hallahan remembered Bader from Cranwell and agreed to a flight test. The examining officer watched with undisguised skepticism as Bader hauled himself into an Avro Tudor using upper body strength. That 7 years of compensation had developed to impressive levels. The takeoff was smooth. The handling maneuvers were competent. Then Bader put the trainer through a sequence of aerobatics that removed any doubt about his ability. The verdict came through in February 1940, provisionally cleared for flying duties. By May, Squadron Leader Bader was flying Spitfires with No. 19 Squadron at Duxford. His first kill came over Dunkirk in May 1940, a Messerschmitt Bf 109 that crossed his gun sight at 400 yards. He pressed the firing button. 8 Browning machine guns hammered out their staccato rhythm. The German fighter's canopy shattered, and the aircraft rolled inverted, trailing smoke into the English Channel. The subsequent months revealed something nobody had predicted. Bader's artificial legs conferred an odd advantage during high-G maneuvers. Normal pilots suffered G-induced loss of consciousness when tight turns forced blood away from their brains and down into their legs. Bader's legs, being aluminum and incapable of pooling blood, meant his body had less volume to perfuse. He could sustain tighter turns for slightly longer before graying out. It wasn't a massive advantage, but in combat, where microseconds determined who lived and who burned, every edge mattered. He learned to exploit this quirk, turning inside German fighters whose pilots expected the Spitfire to break off first. By August, he commanded No. 242 Squadron at Kolteschall. His score climbed steadily. 1 confirmed kill became 3, then 5, then 7. He developed a reputation for aggressive tactics and absolute refusal to break off an attack once committed. Pilots followed him because he brought them home alive more often than not, and because watching a man with tin legs outfly, the Luftwaffe did something profound to their sense of what was possible. The big wing controversy erupted during the Battle of Britain, and Bader found himself at the center of a tactical debate that divided commanders. He argued that squadrons should mass together, 3 or 4 squadrons forming a wing of 60 aircraft before engaging German formations. Air Vice Marshal Keith Park considered this romantic nonsense. His squadrons were scrambling to meet raids already crossing the coast. Assembling a big wing took 30 precious minutes while German bombers plastered airfields. When Bader's system worked, it worked spectacularly. On September 7th, his wing intercepted a massive raid over London, tearing into Dornier bombers with such ferocity that the formation broke apart. When it failed, raids hit targets and turned for home before the Duxford wing even formed up. By December 1940, his confirmed kill tally stood at 12. The Air Ministry promoted him to wing commander, and he moved to Tangmere in March 1941 to lead offensive sweeps over occupied France. The Tangmere wing flew almost daily during spring 1941, crossing the Channel at altitudes where contrails marked their progress like chalk lines across a blackboard. German flak batteries knew the routes by heart. Messerschmitt Bf 109F models, faster and better armed than earlier variants, rose to meet each incursion. Bader added to his score steadily. A Bf 109 on March 21st, another on April 4th. 2 more on June 21st, during a particularly savage dogfight over Bethune. His total climbed past 15, then past 20, and then on August 9, 1941, over the French countryside near Saint-Omer, his extraordinary luck finally ran out. The circus operation on August 9, 1941, targeted a power station at Gosnay, near Bethune. Bader led the Tangmere wing across the Channel in early afternoon. 5 squadrons of Spitfires stepped up at different altitudes. 6 Bristol Blenheim bombers droned toward their target, while German radar tracked their approach. The Messerschmitts arrived from above and behind, diving out of the sun, the radio filled with clipped warnings. Then everything dissolved into chaotic violence. Aircraft wheeled and turned, tracer rounds drew luminous lines through the sky. Bader fastened onto a Bf-109, closed to 200 yards, and fired a burst that sent pieces flying from its wing root. What happened next remained unclear even to Bader himself. He felt a massive impact, whether from collision, cannon fire, or even friendly fire. The impact tore his Spitfire apart. The tail sections separated. The fuselage pitched forward into a violent tumble. His artificial right leg caught on the control column as he tried to bail out. He pushed against the trapped leg with both hands, felt it separate from its mounting straps, and then the slipstream caught him. The parachute deployed with brutal shock. He hung suspended in sudden silence, watching his Spitfire spiral down toward France. His right prosthetic leg was gone. He landed in a field near Saint-Omer, rolled badly because he had only one artificial leg remaining, and lay in the summer grass taking inventory. German Wehrmacht soldiers arrived within minutes, treating him with correct military courtesy. A young officer asked if Bader was injured beyond the obvious. Bader, sitting in a French field with one artificial leg and bleeding from canopy fragments, observed that he'd been better, but thanked them for asking. His war as a fighter pilot had ended. His war as a prisoner was beginning. The interrogation center at Duleg Luft near Frankfurt tried extracting information while maintaining civilized conversation between professional warriors. They asked about his squadron, tactics, aircraft capabilities. He provided name, rank, and service number. Wing commander Douglas Bader, service number 33,777, and nothing else. After 3 days, they gave up and sent him to Stalag Luft 3 at Sagan. Stalag Luft 3, in August 1941, housed roughly 800 Allied airmen. Bader arrived without his right prosthetic leg, hobbling on crutches. The German commandant, Oberst Friedrich Wilhelm von Lindener, made what he thought was a generous offer. If Bader gave his word not to escape, he could receive greater freedom. Bader's response became legendary. He informed von Lindener with perfect politeness that escaping was his duty and that he'd be damned before giving any promise. The RAF, through Swedish Red Cross and coded messages, eventually arranged for a replacement leg. By December 1941, Bader possessed 2 functioning legs again and immediately became one of the camp's most energetic escape artists. His first attempt in March 1942 involved a tunnel that collapsed 20 feet from the wire. His second, in June, involved hiding in a waste cart, which failed when guards probed the rubbish with bayonets. Every scheme forced the Germans to divert resources: more guards, more searches, more administrative effort. After his 4th escape attempt in January 1943, camp authorities confiscated both artificial legs and locked them away. He spent 3 days on makeshift crutches before the senior British officer intervened, arguing that removing prosthetics violated Geneva Convention provisions. The Germans returned the legs with stern warnings. Bader responded by immediately planning more escapes. He'd be transferred to Colditz Castle, sent to a supposedly escape-proof facility where difficult prisoners could be concentrated. Even there, he continued planning escapes until Russian artillery started landing and the war ground toward its conclusion. The telegram from the Air Ministry reached Thelma in April 1945 with news that her husband was alive and would be returning home shortly. Soviet forces had liberated Colditz on April 15th. The war in Europe ended 3 weeks later with Germany's unconditional surrender, and Bader found himself swept up in the chaotic repatriation process. He arrived in England thinner than he'd been in 1941, his uniform threadbare from years of wear, but otherwise intact, and already making plans to resume his RAF career, as though the previous 4 years had been merely an inconvenient interruption. The official kill tally took months to verify through bureaucratic machinery that cross-referenced combat reports, witness statements, and gun camera footage. The final accounting credited him with 20 confirmed aerial victories, 2 shared kills, 6 probables, and 11 damaged, which translates to 22 confirmed when you add the shared kills. The numbers mattered less than what they represented. He'd achieved more than most able-bodied pilots despite flying with artificial legs, and he'd done it while leading entire wings rather than hunting for personal glory. The Distinguished Service Order and Bar came through in recognition. Along with the Distinguished Flying Cross and Bar, King George VI presented the medals at Buckingham Palace in July 1945, and photographers captured the image of a monarch shaking hands with a pilot whose legs were held together with leather straps and aluminum rivets. Post-war RAF life proved unexpectedly difficult. The service was contracting rapidly, and the positions available suited administrators more than fighter pilots. Bader received various staff positions that involved exactly the sort of desk work he'd detested before the war. He attended meetings about budgets and aircraft procurement. He gave speeches about the Battle of Britain to civic groups who wanted to hear about Daring Do and Spitfires. The work was necessary, but it felt like suffocating by degrees. His retirement from the RAF came in 1946 after he accepted that peacetime service offered nothing he actually wanted. Shell Oil hired him to manage their aviation fuel division, capitalizing on his name recognition while actually requiring competent management of complex logistics. The speaking engagements multiplied as his fame grew. Paul Brickhill's book, Reach for the Sky, appeared in 1954, telling Bader's story to an audience hungry for uncomplicated heroism. The book sold phenomenally, was translated into dozens of languages, and became required reading in schools throughout the Commonwealth. British cinema produced a film version in 1956 with Kenneth More playing Bader with just enough stiff upper lip determination to satisfy audiences who wanted their war heroes to fit comfortable templates. The real Bader found the celebrity status bewildering and occasionally irritating, particularly when people expected him to perform heroism on demand or live up to the simplified version of himself that existed in public imagination. He worked extensively with organizations serving disabled veterans, speaking at rehabilitation centers where his presence carried more weight than any motivational speech could manage. A man walking on artificial legs while talking about shooting down Messerschmitts provided proof, more compelling than statistics, that injury didn't necessarily mean the end of useful life. His influence on RAF policy regarding disabled personnel created ripples that extended far beyond his own case. By the 1960s, the RAF began evaluating injured personnel based on capability rather than applying blanket disqualifications. Pilots who lost limbs after initial training could potentially return to flying duties if they demonstrated adequate adaptation. The principle assess the person rather than the disabilities sounds obvious now, but represented genuine progress. And Bader's wartime record provided the evidence base that made policy changes possible. His relationship with Germany evolved considerably over subsequent decades. He'd fought German pilots with genuine respect for their skill, had been treated reasonably well as a prisoner despite his escape attempts, and maintained that national enmity shouldn't survive the conflicts that created it. He visited Germany repeatedly during the 1960s and 70s, meeting former Luftwaffe pilots at aviation reunions where old enemies compared notes about aircraft performance and swapped stories about near misses and mechanical failures. Adolf Galland, who'd scored more than 100 victories flying for the Luftwaffe, became something approaching a friend, their conversations focusing on tactics and technology rather than politics. His final years brought inevitable decline, compounded by 50 years using prosthetics. Constant mechanical stress on his hips and spine created chronic pain. Heart problems developed. He died on September 5, 1982, at Royal Masonic Hospital in London, aged 72. The funeral at St. Clement Danes drew hundreds of former pilots, disabled veterans, officials recognizing something more than a fighter ace had died. Marshal of the Royal Air Force, Sir Dermot Boyle, emphasized not Bader's victories, but his demonstration that catastrophic injury need not define possibilities. The memorial concluded with a flypast of Spitfires and Hurricanes, their Merlin engines producing that distinctive growl that had once filled skies over southern England during Britain's most desperate summer. His story remains embedded in RAF culture, though sometimes simplified in ways that miss complexity, the arrogance enabling achievements while complicating relationships, the privilege providing second chances, the historical accident of being the right person at the right moment. What persists is fundamental truth. Human beings possess remarkable capacity for adaptation. Institutional prejudices about capability deserve challenge. And sometimes people written off as finished are merely waiting for circumstances allowing them to prove otherwise. They mocked the one-legged pilot, dismissed him as finished, told him the sky was no longer his. And Douglas Bader, clicking across tarmac on aluminum legs, climbed into his Spitfire and proved them all catastrophically, gloriously wrong.